Hello and welcome to the Burlington Mayor's Show for the month of October 2021. And thanks for tuning in again. It's great to be in the studios. Second month in a row we've been in the studio after a long hiatus. And I'm joined today by our general manager for the Burlington Electric Department, Darren Springer. And the reason Darren is on with me is we are talking about what we're calling the net zero revenue bond, which is one of two items that is now before Burlington voters for approval in a special election that is already underway. It's the ballots. If you're a registered Burlington voter, there's a very good chance that you got in the mail yesterday or in the next couple of days a ballot that has two questions on it. One is about a general obligation bond, which is what we talked about on the Burlington Mayor's Show last month. And so if you want to see a whole deep dive into that, go to the archives here for town meeting television, and you can find that show. What we're going to talk about tonight is the other ballot question, which is about this net zero energy revenue bond. It is a $20 million item. It is an item that, from my perspective, represents a huge step towards the goal we've established of becoming perhaps America's first net zero energy community by 2030. And what that means is that we would essentially not be burning any fossil fuels for the electricity in this community, for ground transportation, and for the heating and cooling of our buildings. And it's a very ambitious goal, about twice as ambitious as President Biden's goal for the country to get to 50% by 2030. And yet it is one that we so far, in the almost 2 years that we've had this goal, we've been doing pretty well on. We're not running victory laps on this yet, though, and that we have a long way to go to get to this goal. And we have many changes within our community that are going to be necessary to do it. This bond is an important step towards getting there. So that's what we're talking about. Why don't I hand it over to you, Darren? You could give a little bit of the background, and then we'll get into some of the details of the bond itself.
Great. Well, thanks, Mayor. Thanks for having me on the show. And we're excited at Burlington Electric about the opportunity here with the revenue bond. As you mentioned, very few communities are taking on a goal this ambitious in the country, and we need to be able to finance the improvements that are needed for the grid and for customers to be able to make the changes from a technology standpoint to be able to move in the direction that we want to move. And the revenue bond is a first foundational step for us in making that happen. So we're excited about it. We do have some slides that we can run through. And,
yeah, why don't we pull up the slides before we just want to say there's the call-in number 862-3966. I'm not sure if that's still going to be visible once we put up the slides, but we're ready to take your questions about this or anything else in municipal government. But let's dive into the slides.
Excellent. So we'll pull those up here just a moment. And here we go. So net zero energy, just first slide here, just a little bit about Burlington Electric for folks who may not be familiar. We are Burlington's public power utility, over 100 years old, over 100 employees, 118, including the McNeil wood chip plant, third largest utility in the state. And we are 100% renewable since 2014. And we actually went 12 years without a rate increase. Coming out of the pandemic, we had our first rate increase in 12 years. So moving forward to the revenue bond, a few basics on the bond itself. We have the authority here to move forward based on the Burlington Charter and the General Bond Resolution. This requires approval of a majority of voters in Burlington, and it's payable solely from Burlington Electric rates and revenues. It's not a city general fund obligation. It doesn't impact on property taxes, does not affect the city's debt policy or debt ratio. And it's a strategy we've used a number of times in the past. Including...
Let's not let that go by without making the point, which is a really important point about this bond, is it's not even going to affect your electric rates, this one, very much.
Well, that's right. When we think about the bond, we have a strategy to repay it that is going to help in the future, and it actually is going to reduce upward pressure on rates in the near term while we invest. I'll touch on that in a couple slides as well, but it's an important point. This is a fiscally responsible path here that we're trying to put forward. Awesome.
Didn't mean to take you out of stream here, but just this is unlike I think most people when they have in their head they're being asked to vote on a bond, there's some form of sacrifice that's usually being asked. I mean, generally there's a relationship between when the schools come forward or the city for general obligation bonds, there is an increase in taxes associated with it. This revenue bond, we're really hopeful, as Darren's going to explain, it's different. It to some degree is pays for itself. We're also essentially using revenues from refinanced debt, so the impact is actually positive initially, as Darren just said, and modest over time. But I'll let you get back to it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we'll jump to that in a couple slides. Just want to let folks know that we have a really great history of using the revenue bond financing tool, including for energy efficiency. Back in 1990, we had an $11.3 million bond for efficiency that was foundational, and currently we're using less electricity today than we were in 1989 as a result of that bond and further investments that were made over the subsequent decades. So there's precedent for using this strategy, and we're hopeful that the net zero bond will be similarly foundational for our climate strategy going forward. So it's a $20 million proposal. What does it go into? About $12.3 million would go into the electric grid for reliability improvements and to accommodate new uses, such as new electric vehicles and heat pumps and other electrification technologies. About $3.9 million in technology systems to replace aging software and to help us design new rates and new strategies to help customers save money. $2.2 million into our renewable generation facilities and plants, like the Winooski 1 hydro facility, and also to convert our peaker plant to run on renewable biodiesel instead of oil. And then $1.5 million that would go into net zero capital investments, like new EV charging stations in the community. The other exciting piece of this is we are going to use, under this strategy, a portion of our annual bond funding to double the funding for our customer incentives that are currently available and really try to ramp up adoption of these different technologies. By doing that, we can actually keep our green stimulus program going. We can save or reduce 47,000 tons of emissions lifetime compared to business as usual, which is equivalent to about 100,000 barrels of oil. And we can do this in a sense to accelerate our progress on climate above and beyond where we would otherwise be. This chart just shows the dark blue line here that we really saw a significant jump in the middle of 2020 with our green stimulus. We've had 1,400 customers of Burlington Electric take advantage of our strategic electrification incentives for lawnmowers, for heat pumps, for EVs and e-bikes and all other technologies. And we actually tripled our state target last year, and we're on track to do more than our state target again this year. So our Burlington Electric customers are taking part in these activities, and there's good reason to try to increase the funding to support our customers in that regard. So these last couple of slides touch on the point that the mayor just made. If we want to invest in reliability and climate progress and do so while maintaining our financial metrics, with the revenue bond, we would see a significant reduction in upward rate pressure using fiscal 23 as an example, compared to without the revenue bond. So in the near term, we're going to actually reduce upward rate pressure for customers by utilizing the revenue bond as a financing tool. Over the long run, as the mayor mentioned, we have the ability to capture some savings from an existing repayment that will expire in 2025 and capture revenues from these different projects we've been talking about with EVs and heat pumps, such that we can cover repayment in large part of the revenue bond debt service through these two strategies and put very minimal pressure on rates for ratepayers.
Let's talk about that revenue piece a little bit, just because I think it's a really interesting part of what we're trying to do here, and one that I think is, to agree people have questions about this. I think it's sometimes misunderstood. We have been offering these significant incentives, green stimulus incentives, and occasionally I get a question of generally I gotta say the public reaction to this has been very positive and people are excited about them, and many Burlingtonians, hundreds of Burlingtonians now have used one of these incentives or another, whether it's a big one like the heat pump incentives or a lot of people start out with the most popular one is the lawnmowers, right?
It was. The heat pump has now overtaken it.
Yeah, it has. All right. Well, that's great to hear. So, I think to some people, these look like kind of government handouts, these sort of subsidies, and I think really the image people should have in their mind about these is it's essentially like the hotel that is going to have, or airline that's going to have empty seats, or hotel that's going to have empty beds for the night, and has an asset that they can secure revenue for if they change the pricing of it. Essentially, we have this capacity of electricity that goes untapped for especially off-peak electricity. These incentives are really, I think, a sound business decision on the part of BED that creates more revenues flowing to the department. That every time someone takes advantage of one of these incentives, whether it's a lawnmower or a heat pump, there is a significant new revenue stream that is that household is going to be using electricity instead of gasoline and natural gas, which has these environmental benefits, has these financial benefits to BED of generating new revenues. And this net zero energy plan is only possible, will result in something like a 60% increase in revenues flowing to the utility when successful, right?
That's right. What we're talking about is using the electric grid to really help get rid of fossil fuel use in the heating and transportation sectors, switching folks from fossil fuels like gasoline in their vehicles over to an electric vehicle or over to electric heating. And we have capacity to do that in an inexpensive way. Use the electric vehicle as an example. If you're on our charging rate and you're a residential customer, you can charge for roughly the equivalent of 60 cents a gallon overnight when we have cheaper electricity compared to $3, $4 at the pump. So it's 100% renewable. It's local as opposed to your gasoline, which is coming in from out of state or in some cases out of the country. We're keeping more dollars here in the community and we're helping people save money. So it's definitely a business case strategy for the utility and the customer that makes this work.
And some of these economics actually play out in this bond. Just to reiterate the point, these green incentives will result in new revenues flowing to the utility. That increase in revenues will help pay off this bond, and actually, in a way that is unusual in bonding, it somewhat pays for itself.
That's right. We're projecting that 40% of the repayment of the debt is going to be coming from revenues from these different strategic electrification projects, which is significant, and it speaks to the business case of making these investments.
So the number's still up there if people are interested in calling in, 862-3766. And again, happy to answer any questions about this bond, the other bond in the special election, or anything else that is on your mind. Did you have more on the presentation, Darren, or have we pretty much...
I think we wrapped that up, and that presentation is available online as well at the various MPAs we've presented. We have it on each of the MPA websites and the City Council website as well.
Can you say a little bit more about why upgrades to the grid are necessary to fulfill this vision and what this allows us to do?
Absolutely. So when we think about adding new loads, we can move some of them off peak like we talked about with electric vehicles, but over time we will want to add to the grid so that we have capacity for everybody who needs to and wants to switch to heat pumps and EVs to have the capacity to do so. We did some analysis as part of our integrated resource plan that we submit to the Public Utility Commission every 3 years, looking at what the grid upgrades would be. And this revenue bond is funding the first tranche of those upgrades. What we found is we need to make an investment of about $20 million over a period of years to move our grid up to about 102 megawatts of capacity from today, where we're about 80 megawatts of capacity. But speaking to the business case, what we found is the new revenues from the different electrification projects will more than pay for those upgrades. And in fact, moving in this direction compared to business as usual, there's about a 50% reduction in upward rate pressure by moving towards net zero. So significant benefit for our customers. What we're talking about doing is switching a lot of energy use over to electricity. So we want the grid to be as strong, resilient, and capable of delivering that for everybody and keep the reliability as strong as it's been. Burlington average customer sees an outage per year, and the duration is typically under an hour, which is really extraordinary. and speaks to the work of our line crews and our dispatch team, but also we've undergrounded a lot of infrastructure and hardened a lot of infrastructure as well.
Great. How does this, what we're trying to do here, fit in with any of the national conversation? Sometimes I get this question with the general obligation bonding we're trying to do. There's this infrastructure bill that's out there that we're hoping is going to pass soon and could provide some additional, significant additional funding to municipalities. How do you see anything about that infrastructure bill impacting the Burlington Electric Department?
Yes, in a good way. I think there are different funding opportunities with the federal bill. There's going to be perhaps additional dollars for EV charging, for the electric grid, incentives for customers to move in this direction as well, potentially. And so even though we're making some investments here that are critical, that we need to move forward with, if the federal legislation comes as well, we'll be able to make more progress more quickly. And I think you spoke to it earlier, we have a very ambitious goal. It's very hard to make this amount of progress by 2030. That's why many of the timeframes are really focused on 2050. So moving quickly, we need as much funding from the federal government that we can get, and policy support as well.
Let's just, since we got a few more minutes here, not we're getting towards the end of the show, but let's talk a little bit more about just this vision of strategic electrification and how significant this is. I think it's something that still hasn't completely set in the sort of general public about that. This is, to a very large degree, the solution to the climate emergency. Maybe 70%, I think, is of the climate emergency could be addressed through strategic electrification. You kind of see it playing. It makes sort of visceral sense when you think about what we're trying to do here. I mean, this roadmap essentially has all of the vehicles in the city switching from these gas-burning vehicles to electric vehicles within the decade. It seemed pretty outlandish when we kind of said this was the goal in 2019. It seems a lot less so now, I would say.
Right.
This is where the world is moving clearly with Tesla becoming the most valuable car company in the world, with General Motors saying they're going to be all electric by 2035, right? So we are really trying to push this quicker, and then similarly on the building side, you can see that if we pulled this off, you can see how this would make a great impact. What do you think do you think we're going to do this? You think this is where society's going?
Yes, absolutely. I think you've seen the automakers are making those commitments driven by policy change and consumer change. The Renewable Energy Vermont Conference just finished up. The keynote speaker this year was Saul Griffith, whose entire strategy is the Electrify Everything strategy. Essentially, we need to have the cleanest grid possible, and we need to move as many uses off of fossil fuels and to the grid. So we're seeing it. We're seeing it in the heating sector and elsewhere too.
The cleanest grid is a really interesting thing, and this is another reminder how special Burlington is. Like, the big fight at the national level is they're not there. There's a big battle on how quickly the grid is going to become powered by renewables, right?
Correct.
And what is the current stat? It's like 25% currently or something like that?
Yeah, renewables and nuclear are roughly around 20% each, roughly, with natural gas and coal still making up the majority of our nation's generating capacity.
The nation has 60% of the way to go still on
Easily.
And we're at 100% now.
We're 100% renewable, so we are, in a sense, as one legislator that I know thinks of it, a postcard from the future. And we are trying to blaze a path that the rest of the country will be following, hopefully in the very near future as well.
One big part of that mix locally, really a significant part of why we were able to get to be the first city in the country to get to 100% is because of the McNeil biomass facility, the sustainably managed facility. Where are we in 30 seconds on the district energy system to close out here?
District energy, we're in phase 3 of feasibility work. This is a project that's been talked about for decades. I think we're closer than ever to making it happen, and we're hopeful over the next couple of months, maybe early next year at the latest, we'll be able to report something to the public about our progress and move that project forward.
That will be big news when we have it there. Thank you all for tuning in. Great talking with you. Come back in November. We'll be back with another edition of the Burlington Mayor's Show. Look for your ballot. Please consider voting yes on both items. Have a good night, everyone.